So welcome to our March technical meeting. Today's meeting is going to be a lot like February's meeting was, where we did frequently asked questions. We filled a lot of questions in prior to February's meeting, and we didn't get through all of them last month. So we wanted to cover the rest of those, and we also wanted to, ask you guys if there are any other questions that are fresh on your mind, and we may be able to address some of them today as well. Before we get started into that, I'll go over the usual housekeeping stuff. These are the training opportunities that I'm aware of that I want to make sure the whole network knows about. I think these have all been up here for the last month or two. So again, make sure you guys all have on your calendar the WAP spring training in April. That's all hands on deck. It's April 15th and 16th up at the training center. Wade has been putting together a really awesome training, and we're excited to have you guys up there. It's going to be really good. Also in April, I'm doing an Auditor 101 class, and that class is full. So those who have signed up should know about it. Just make sure you're aware of it, April 28th through the 30th. And then in May, we have a BPI Energy Auditor class. Those classes we don't ever take more than 4 people. On the Auditor 101 class, if you had some extenuating circumstances, you could reach out to me. You might be able to talk me into one more seat. But on this BPI EA class, we only do four seats. 2 of them have already been taken. So if you are working towards getting your BPI EA, and you are ready to put your application in right now, or you have already, basically just as soon as you get that letter back from BPI, the next 2 people to send me their letters will get those other 2 seats for that class. So, and then also in April, there's the national conference in New Orleans. But keep in mind, if you're thinking about going to that April is kind of already chock full with other trainings. So if you're wanting to go to a national conference, if New Orleans in April doesn't work, there's the Energy Out West in August. I've heard a handful of people from the network are going to the one in August. I think Wade and Dalton and I are going to be at the one in August. It should be a pretty good one. So those are the trainings. There's also this WAP admin training. We talked about it briefly last time. It's an online training, and it's really, really good, specifically if you're trying to just better understand how the whole program works, if you need any administrative training, if you have a new hire that just needs kind of an overview. This is one that they can log in. It's self-paced, and it's really, really good training. Brad, did you have anything on that training or any of these others?
Just that, again, I know there's people out there listening that have actually been using it, if they'd like to provide any feedback. But last week while I was in DC, NREL, who is the agency, National Renewable Energy Lab, are the ones that actually worked with people from the network, like Ian, participated to help create that. As of last week, we were the highest using state in the country, and our #1 gold star overachiever was Tina. She's been using the system more than anybody else in the country. So, appreciate people actually wanting to learn. Not to try to put Tina on the spot, but some of the comments that she passed along me to give back to NREL was that it's very well organized. It's a good overview of what the program, administrative management side of it looks like. The #1 used module in the country were the budgeting modules. So also take that for what it's worth.
Awesome. Is anybody else aware of any other trainings that would be good for the network to be aware of? Or do you have any questions about these ones? Go ahead.
Turner, there's 2 BPI webinars coming up this month, so those who need CEUs.
Okay.
They're usually like an hour long. And there's one on Tuesday, March 10th, and one on Tuesday, March 24th. So
Awesome.
if you need CEUs, you can go onto the website, BPI's website, and you can find those webinars.
All right. Yeah. So just bpi.org, and if you're not already receiving their emails. Thanks, Dalton. Anybody else? Anything else? All right. Along those lines, under the new business, I just had a note here. I wanted to give everybody a heads up. I was talking with Ian last week, and he said that Doppel sent him a nice letter that basically said, because he is a qualifier for their HVAC contract or license, sorry, he had done sufficient number of CEUs and renewed his licensure, but Doppel let him know that he did not do his 3 hours of specific HVAC training, and that they wanted him to address that right away. So be aware, if you ended up picking up your HVAC license recently, when you are renewing that license, 3 of your CEU credits have to be specific to the HVAC training. And those, when you sign up for those classes, they are very good about identifying when those are HVAC or electrical or plumbing or any of the other specialties. So be aware of that. And if you as you have a game plan for the next 2 years to make sure and cover your CEUs, make sure you're getting specific HVAC training. So anybody else run into that, or anybody else have any comments there?
Just a quick note, every year the RMGA does at least 2 trainings which cover the 3 HVAC specific training plus the core training. So just go to the RMGA website and look for their training events, and you can go to a 1-day training which will get you all of your CEUs for your S350 license.
Awesome. Thanks, Wade. And then just a note, because next month we are doing our WAP spring training, we will not be holding a technical meeting next month. So our next technical meeting will be May 5th. So that's the only month that we end up skipping the technical meeting. So if you're looking for the email about that, that's why it's not coming. All right.
Hey, Turner, hold on one thing. Yes,
Yeah.
New business. You only have a few more days left to submit your stuff for your awards for the conference, for the What Were You Thinking Award, Health and Safety Hero, and if you are wanting to nominate somebody for the Mike Johnson Award as well. So please, the emails have been sent out, the links to the form to submit, please do that.
Awesome. So just check in your inbox, because you guys all got an email or 2 about that, right?
If
All
not,
right.
talk to your boss. They have it.
Yeah. Okay. So on to the main topic. I just did a quick list of what we covered last month, just to kind of refresh your memories. So we talked about handling protected client info, addressing ASHRAE in laundry rooms and half baths. There was a question about how does audit treat the window versus the furnace replacement? What should combustion analysis include? Like, what should the file look like? When do I meter a fridge? When do I install heat pumps? When do I install ductless mini splits? And my last one's covered up by, there it is. What do you do with an old 95% efficient furnace? So we covered all that. We kind of actually ended right at the end of that one. So that's where we'll probably pick up here. But before we do, I just wanted to ask you guys, does anybody have any questions that you'd like to throw out there that we can talk about today that you haven't already sent us?
I have one.
Yeah.
It's kind of a silly one, but what do you do when you know a client's not going to move their stuff so we're able to do a measure? Is it better to evaluate for it and they technically refuse it, so it removes everything below the list on it, or do I just not evaluate for it? Like wall insulation due to paneling or shelving or, what have you?
That's a great question. Does anybody in the network have any strategies or anything that they do? Anybody done anything that works well, or what do you guys typically do in this scenario?
Give you some things to consider, Jesse. And one of those things is, I think sometimes people forget the impact of doing a job, DOE, completing it. You don't get to go back. And sometimes it's very easy to become focused on the number of widgets, and you make that decision, oh, well, I'm going to do whatever I can to get this thing across the line. And some of these jobs that get turned in sometimes where you spend a whopping $400 and some and 360 of it was in health and safety, but the card's been burned. That client now is no longer eligible for DOE weatherization, and what have you accomplished? Right now the economy is good. Some of your waiting lists are short. You make decisions based off of those influences, and you never consider the impact to the client, to the household. Where there's an abundance of other funding sources that don't have some of those restrictions, like maybe crisis and other things, sometimes maybe it's better to just treat certain specific measures in the home and treat it as a crisis job instead of trying to force it to get a weatherization completion. But there is no perfect answer. You have to look at each individual home. The basic rules and policies of the program say when you have clutter and things in the way and you can't get it moved by the client, it's a deferral. A lot of times people make those decisions to try to, basically what you're asking, how do I circumnavigate this and still get a completion? And when you look at it in the larger picture, is that the right answer to begin with? Well, there's your official non-answer to your question.
I want to ask a question to clarify. So if you were to push that through and do it, and then you got to that situation and the client said, no, you can't do this, or they hadn't prepared for it, is that not now, like, I understand, like, at that point we stop and we do no more work, but it's still not a completion, so don't we just waste? Because now that's a partial weatherization, correct? That doesn't really count toward their numbers.
So I just made a couple of changes to the guidelines that really cover this, and it's based off of DOE put out some guidance under its weatherization program known as 19-4, and it addresses auditing and auditing standards. And they basically talk about how the cherry picking rule, where if you've evaluated, you've determined here's this list of 5 energy conservation measures that we need to install, and when you get to the home, if the client now refuses to allow you to install it, you basically have to stop there. You can't go any further. And they clarified a few things that help with that. They actually identified some of the things that we do, they call them major measures, and some of the things that we do, they call minor measures. And so they've actually made it a little easier to actually go, if you run into that situation, if what you are not able to install is a minor measure, then you can still continue on with your job and complete it and turn it in as a weatherization completion. The other thing that's interesting that they haven't come right out and directly addressed it, but as we have submitted guidance in the past and had them review it, some of their comments back were basically, in some instances, you don't have an opportunity to install the measure. And so sometimes if there is just no opportunity to install the measure, then they don't consider it something that you should even evaluate. So you kind of run into that with Jesse Chambers' question here. You can run into both of those. If you do evaluate it and there is a good opportunity to do it, but then the client straight out refuses, you could run into the major measure clause where you would need to stop and defer the project, and you'd have to turn it in as a partial completion. On the flip side of that, there are some instances where, and I've been in a number of homes where there's a bunch of food storage shelves that are permanently attached to the wall, and it makes it extremely difficult to insulate that wall behind it, or in a lot of cases it makes it impossible without removing the entire shelving unit. And my personal opinion on that is a lot of times I look at that and consider that as there's no opportunity there to insulate that wall. So it's just like Brad, I'm not going to give you the perfect answer. Some of the things, he's given you great things to consider, and then also just consider exactly what's going on in the home. Consider whether the client might actually have the ability to move the stuff. And I've also recommended in the past that if you're looking at, you have the opportunity to insulate a bunch of stuff if there was some things moved, it's okay to add an hour of labor as an additional cost to that insulation measure. But you need to be aware you're taking a risk upon yourself and your agency if you start moving a client's stuff, because you could break their stuff. So in that case, I would say defer to what your coordinator would like you to do there. If they don't mind having you guys spend a little bit of time moving stuff around so you can do a better job, but you guys are going to have to use your best judgment on that. So.
Okay.
And one other caveat to continue to point out there. So yeah, they did issue that guidance under 19.4 about your auditing standards and stuff, but in classic Fed speak, it doesn't ever outright tell you get to circumnavigate deferral of service. And most of those things that we have on that deferral list was generated eons ago, but yet every year annually in the state plan, I have to address how we are handling these specific deferral items. And that clutter thing is one of those specific things. And then, as you may recall, we asked about this time last year to start looking at tracking deferrals, because that's starting to come up nationally. And they were still talking about it last week in D.C. So you're going to run into these scenarios where they offer some guidance over here and you think, oh, I have a clear path now. But it never superseded the other guidance on deferral. It may say, oh, yes, there are situations where you might be able to pass up this minor measure, but if that reason was something that did constitute deferral under policy, you're probably going to have that used against you at some point by the feds. And so therefore we need to be conscious of that as well too.
Clear as mud, Chambers? Does anybody else have anything on this one, or do you guys have other questions?
Yes, that was clear as mud, by the way.
Okay.
We try to give you a little bit of room. If we ever have a client that calls us and said, hey, they deferred us and we're upset, we're going to have your back. There are going to be those times when we will review it and we may say, hey, can we take a second look at this? But we will never throw you under the bus with your client. We will never, we always look at both sides of the story, and then we just try to consider what we can do to help everybody. So so when you guys do have that opportunity to make your own decisions, we will support you with them. So any other questions?
To support you.
Yeah,
which means documentation, following policy.
good point. All right, other questions? Okay, I'm going to jump into some of the questions we had left over, but this really can be as interactive as you guys want it to be, so don't hesitate to interrupt us and jump in with a question, or if what we're explaining is not very clear, feel free to speak up and we'll try to clear it up a little bit. So I think the first couple of slides go to Wade.
Yeah, can you give me screen control?
Screen control to Major Tom. Possibly. Do you have an icon where you can click on the screen on your end, Wade?
To share your screen, ask the organizer to make me the presenter.
Let me see if I can find
Since
you.
they've changed their name.
Thanks, Brad.
Ah, okay, I am the presenter. All right, here we go.
Good thing you brought me along on this trip.
We do need you every once in a while, Brad.
Wait a minute, I'm more than just a signature?
Uh-huh.
Hold on a minute.
Oh, with comic relief.
Uh-huh.
Okay, can everyone see my screen with the JTA assessment results on it?
Yeah.
All right, so I just wanted to update you all. You all went through the process of taking these JTA assessments. It's part of our training plan we've submitted to DOE, part of this Tier 1 training where we have to provide comprehensive, all-encompassing training based on the JTAs for your specific job. So everybody took the test, so thank you everybody for getting it done in the time that we needed it done in. We had a total of 46 individuals that fall under the category of crew leader or retrofit installer. 35 of them passed. We had 11 who failed, so good job. Most of you passed. We had 20 auditors. 13 of them passed, 7 failed, so good job. Bulk of you passed. QCIs, 22 of them, 17 passed, and only 5 failed. So these are good numbers. Good numbers to report to DOE. We've got some areas we need to work in. We've been going through.
Hang on.
Go ahead.
Let's clear up. The pass and fail is not really pass and fail. Again, the whole point behind these assessments was to figure out where we needed to do training.
Yeah,
So
Brad's right. It doesn't mean you're bad.
Failed is not that accurate because that's not the case. All it was you either answered 80% of the questions correctly or you didn't. And all that means is it gives us more to train on or less to train on. It's not pass or fail.
This is just semantical. These are just the words we use. This doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean you did wrong. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just gives us information about where we need to focus our training efforts. So this stuff over here, we know you already know, so why waste time training on this stuff? This is where we need to focus our efforts. So when I say pass and fail, don't think, oh my God, I'm a failure, I'm horrible, I'm bad at my job. That's not the case. So,
and if anything, what it says, is that, so basically 75% of you have a 80, wow, this is like weird math. 75% of you have an 80% or better understanding of your job, which that's pretty good. But given how many years a lot of you have been doing it, it makes sense. And that's the argument we've been making all along with the Department of Energy is that we have a very well-trained, competent network, and we only want to focus on what we need to train versus training them on a large portion of things that would be redundant and unnecessary. So thank you for helping me prove my argument.
the biggest portion of this stuff, just if you're curious, was basically math and building science. So we know we got a little bit of work to do in math and building science. So that's, you know, kind of where we have been, and we'll kind of keep banging on that until we can get this all taken care of. So any questions about the JTA assessments? Okay.
These numbers might move a little bit. We've got to review a couple of the questions.
Yeah, there are
There's
some.
a couple that had a very high miss rate that we think the questions might be suspect, and we might end up tossing those.
But we'll keep you posted as we go along. I know some of the coordinators had asked if they could get specific information about their employees' scores. I'll defer that question to Brad.
Once we have final results, we'll share that information with you accordingly. But we're very preliminary until we scrub it and we're comfortable with the reliability of a couple of those questions, because they're a little suspect. We'll hold on to that until we're ready to give you our final answer.
And thanks to those of you who actually sent us feedback on some of the questions. We asked if you think a question is suspect or worded wrong or whatever, or you didn't understand it, to let us know. And a few of you did, so I appreciate that. That helps us just to make things better.
We still got to review those too in relation to our high error questions and just see if we can make sense of it all. We just right now, preliminary data, that's pretty raw right there, what you just saw.
Okay, so back to the frequently asked questions. This question doesn't come up a lot, especially along the Wasatch Front, because pretty much fuel oil furnaces are gone. Dominion has reached into all the crevices and corners of Utah pretty much now, but there are still a few places. I was asked this question just a couple of weeks ago by someone. So the client has a 25-year-old oil furnace. It's still working. There is no natural gas available. What should we do? Well, there are now 90% efficient fuel oil furnaces on the market. They're brand new. I have never personally worked on one or installed one because they're so new, but they do exist. It's been a long, long time since I've worked on an oil furnace because they just disappeared. When I started in the industry 100 years ago, there were still several of them left, especially up in Ogden Canyon and Eden and Huntsville area. So I cut my teeth on oil furnaces, but they're a thing of the past in this area now. So yes, there is an opportunity to upgrade to a higher efficient oil furnace. Even a standard 85% efficient, and that's the baseline standard now for oil burning furnaces, is 85%, would be better than a 20-year-old 65 or 70% efficient furnace. I'm not sure how that would run in the audit. That would be something you'd want to work with Turner, but yes, there is room for improvement there. But there's things you got to be aware of when you do it. So if you're dealing with an oil furnace that is that old, you will have to replace the flue. I can guarantee you that. And they take a special flue. It's a stainless steel, insulated, triple wall type flue. They're very expensive. But if it's a 20-year-old or older furnace, that flue is going to be rotten and full of creosote and soot and all kinds of garbage. So it's going to have to be replaced. So you're going to have to factor that in. Proper setup of these things is critical, and they are different than natural gas. You've got to know what you're doing. If you've never worked on one, you probably need to read the instructions. You probably need to consult with someone who's worked on one, because they're different animals. Routine maintenance is absolutely a must. The client's got to know that every year there's oil filters that have to be replaced. There's actually an oil filter that looks just like the one that's in your car that you have to replace on them. There's primary and secondary filters. There's spray nozzles that wear out. There's high pressure pumps that need service and wear out. Ignition electrodes that need to be maintained. And then, of course, the fuel tanks require routine cleaning and inspection. And as always, read the manufacturer's installation instructions. So if you ever run into this, yes, there are options available. You can make them better. If a oil furnace is that old, the chances are pretty dang good that the heat exchangers are compromised. Oil furnaces don't use a traditional metal heat exchanger. They have a ceramic brick kind of composite heat exchanger. And over the years of all the intense heat and oil spray on it, they just tend to degrade and break down. So you'd want to be looking at that. Anything that old, I bet you the heat exchanger's shot. So there are options to make them better. If you run into it and you're going to do it, just make sure that whoever is doing the install and working on it knows what they're doing with oil furnaces, or read the instructions that come with it. Any questions about that?
Yeah, do you want to hear the rest of the story on that now?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I ran into the contractor the other day. He hasn't got his bid ready for that yet, but he says he suggests we put in an electric furnace because it would cost half as much as it would cost him to put in a new oil furnace because of the flue and because he can't inspect the tanks because they're underground. So he's suggesting an electric furnace now would be much cheaper to do.
You probably ought to do a little math. See what's going to happen in the long run with that.
Yeah. But that
could be,
10 pounds of red flag too.
yeah. That could be a conversation we can have over the phone or something, Scott.
All right.
The tanks in the ground has me concerned too, because if we start touching those and we own those and they're leaking.
Yeah, we mess with that tank and we own that baby.
Does EPA come knocking on our door?
He just says typically when he does that, he likes to inspect the tanks also, but since they're in the ground, he can't inspect them, so he's a little worried about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be as well too.
They're problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to know what they're paying for fuel oil, and then we can do some math and figure some options out, Scott.
It's not even fuel oil. They're getting diesel now, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's diesel, I'm sure.
Well,
all right. Just
red dye diesel, I guarantee you.
It's red dye. Yeah. And all right. The number is 801-209-8346.
Never an easy solution over here.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. Moving along, if there's no more questions on that. Thanks for the update, Scott. There's been a lot of questions about BPI and what needs to be submitted. So hopefully I can kind of straighten that out for you a little bit. If you are an existing energy auditor, so you hold an existing EA certification and you need to renew, this is the application for renewal, okay? There is a different application. Whoops. This application right here is for someone who does not yet hold their energy auditor certification. So let's start with this one here, because we got a bunch of brand new energy auditors coming up. This is the application that you're going to use because you do not currently have an energy auditor application. And you've got some prerequisites you've got to meet. And so it spells it all out here for you. But notice after each one they say or. That means you can submit this, but if you don't have that, or you could submit this, or you could submit this, okay? So these are what you need to be looking at, and they give you options with the little or on the end. That means you can either do this, or either do this, or either do this. You don't have to do all three of them, okay? Then you have to have the energy models that comply with this ANSI standard, and all you got to do is click on that right there, and that will come up, and you can find the ANSI standard. Loading. and it was section 2.2, so we'll go down there, and we find section 2.2. All energy audit reports shall include the following. So what you send them has to include all this following information right there, okay? So that tells you everything you need, all right? Or if you don't have that, you can do this, 6 hours of training, okay? Again, that meets this ANSI standard. Well, Turner's class, I'm pretty sure meets that standard, right, Turner?
My class meets the standard, but I won't sign off on it.
Okay, there you go.
I want you to run some audits.
We want you to run some audits. Yeah.
If you take my class and run one audit, you don't know jack.
Thank you.
That says a lot about my class, doesn't it?
Or you can be a designated trainer. Well, there's only one person in the program who fits this category, so I don't think any of you can use that. And then you must obtain points. So you have to have points from building experience, points from industry-specific training center whose content aligns. Well, any training you do through me, I can give you a certificate of completion or whatever to cover that, including our online stuff, the LMS stuff, okay? Industry certificates, ResNet, BPI, NATE, EPA. Brad also found out why he was in Washington. They'll
But
accept
wait, there's more.
OSHA 10, OSHA 30. Was there any others, Brad, that I'm missing?
Yeah, they said if there was actually a program or state-specific certification. And there's a couple other things I want to point out. Go up to the first activity there, Wade. Go to the word weatherization. Down under your points, right there. Bingo. Yes, that means if you work in the weatherization program. So if you were Tracy, you talked to me action working in the warehouse, congratulations, Tracy, you get 10 points.
There you
If
go.
you have OSHA, congratulations, you got 20 points. How many do you need, Wade?
Total 20 points.
Merry Christmas.
FYI, they said that OSHA didn't qualify.
Huh?
BPI just told these guys that the OSHA 10 did not qualify as
Did
certification.
they do that in writing?
Yes, they did.
Send it to me, because I've got somebody at DOE that will clarify that, because, yeah, I'll chase that one. Also,
Okay, we'll
under
find
the
it.
experience, the past 3 years' experience, that field or technical position, if you've done any work in the field in the last 6 months, that's what counts. It doesn't have to be as an auditor or a QCI or whatever it could be as a retrofit installer. So those were some clarifications that were made last week in DC. And yeah, send me that, Scott, because
They accepted my lead inspector and renovator also.
But RMGA would qualify as a certification. But if they rejected OSHA, I want that, because they put that specifically out, and I will make them go fix it or apologize.
There you go.
Yeah, Steve and Kate sent in the OSHA and they rejected that, so they had to wait till they got their lead done, and then they accepted the lead, but not the OSHA.
Email it to me.
Yeah, send that to Brad, because he got specific words from DOE that was okay. So again, if you do not currently hold an energy auditor certification, this is the application that you need to be working off of, okay? And you can get this right from bpi.org. That's where I went and got it this morning before the meeting. If you currently have an energy auditor certification and you're just looking to renew, this is the application that you will submit. Notice it's different. It doesn't have the prerequisites in it. You just got to do the energy modeling stuff, okay? And even right here, candidate regularly uses energy modeling software that complies with the specifications identified in the current version of ANSI And if you want to know what that means, you click on that and it'll take you right to it. And they even at the end of this give you templates or letters that you can send. You just got to put them on your company letterhead. We're adamant, and Turner will back me on this, we want you guys doing some audits before you send this stuff in. Just because you've gone through a class doesn't mean you're a great auditor. You got to get out in the field and get dirty and do some audits, okay? But that's the difference between the two applications. Also, again, on the prerequisites, all this comes right from the BPI website, so they've got the prereqs on there, so you can look at those. Another thing that's interesting that I just found out, so they have an exception. BPI certified professionals who are seeking their initial BPI EA certification that also hold an active BPI QCI certification expiring between now and February 27th, 22, Mr. Mike Cram, if you're listening, are eligible to bypass the Energy Auditor written exam. However, they must successfully complete the field exam. So there are a couple of you that fit into this category, okay? So know where you're at, know who you are, and if you fit in this category, you can skip the written exam and just take the field exam. There's a couple of you out there, okay? All right, let's see. Any questions about that stuff? All right, I think. Okay, how do I give the screen back to you now, Turner?
So these next few slides are for Brad. Brad, I threw this extra slide in at the last minute. I don't know if you want to take the screen, Brad, or if you'd like me to click through it.
Hand it back to you, Matt.
Okay. So there's been a few questions about purchasing Nest thermostats, and then I also learned last week that the guys at Utah Community Action were having some issues where their thermostats were overheating when they were trying to charge them before they took them out. Is there anybody on that can speak to that from Utah Community Action? Tell us a little bit about what you're dealing with there. Or has anybody else had the same problem? Well, just be aware that if you are trying to charge them, I think Ian was saying that some of his guys would charge them with like a phone charger in their trucks, and they're frying the thermostats to where the battery starts to heat up and then it just continues to get hotter and hotter and it ruins the thermostats.
Yeah, Turner, how I understood it was the thermostat would get hot, so it would be reading like 80 degrees, even though the house is only like at 70 degrees. And so the furnace would never kick on because the battery, from them plugging it in and charging it beforehand, it was actually, the battery compartment was heating up and so it was throwing the thermostat off on what temperature it actually was in the home.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if they actually ever burned up or anything, but it was keeping the thermostat hot enough to where the thermostat was reading like 80 degrees and it wouldn't kick on the furnace even though the house got below, the desired temperature. So
it sounded like it was a permanent thing though, wasn't it? It wasn't like it would cool back down after a little while and start.
Oh yeah, I think that's what it sounded like to me. It was like because they're charging them at their agency, and Ian wasn't sure if it was the USB cords that they were using to charge it or what, but they kind of started recommending that their guys go out and install the Nest in the morning, because the problem was if you just installed the Nest and you're going to be leaving in like an hour, sometimes it wasn't charged up enough to program for the client. So they're kind of going to a process of where they're installing them in the morning. And so by the end of the day, it should be charged up enough to where they can go to client ed and set the thermostat up. So has anybody else been running into anything like that?
We just left them plugged in overnight here at the office and then take them out in the morning, and they seem to be all right.
It sounded like they had some success doing that, but they were having some failures trying to charge them with random chargers in vehicles and things like that. So just, I guess, be aware of it. Does anybody have, what questions you guys have about purchasing? I know like the original contract ended. Yuka just got some of the last thermostats. Does anybody have questions about how they should be purchasing going forward? Or is everybody pretty clear on that? All right, if you're clear on it, we're good. If not, Brad has sent out a couple of emails on how to do it, so review those. And if you still have questions, then ask Brad. So, and then Brad, I think the next couple slides are yours, are all yours.
Yep. So basement windows, had some questions that have came up a little bit, and it drove us into reviewing actually what the current language in the code is in regard to emergency escape and rescue openings, egress windows in homes, and that led to a few edits that we're going to roll into the guidelines this year. Next slide, Mr. Chair. So right now, if you look at D88, the current language, it gives us all the same old measurements about 5.7, 24, 20, yada, yada. There's the thing in brackets about the 5 square feet above ground level. That is gone, so out of the code. So we've taken that and deleted it. So if we go to the next slide, what we're looking at putting into the guidelines right now, as it's currently edited, is you see that 5 square foot exception for above grade. We deleted that out. Then once the little menu goes away there, and then we added this new section 8.8F that actually goes into the basement windows. There is some language and specifically an exception that talks about basement windows, retrofits, etc. And after looking at it and looking at it in relation to some other aspects of the code, we are going to take a more conservative stance than the way you might feel that section reads in the code. And that reason is because while that exception does talk about modification of basements and allowing you to not make alterations to the foundation, it does not preclude the fact that if the window was done or the basement modification was done under a different version of the code, that is the version of the code that it requires it to comply with. And so the exception does not say you magically don't have to do windows. It says when modifying your basement. And since we come into these and they're mostly already been done, a lot of times without permits, we're going to take a more conservative approach. But the bottom line answer is you can replace basement windows that do not meet egress. You should be evaluating and considering them when you're doing your audit. But if that room is a bedroom or a sleeping area, then those windows should not be evaluated and we should not be replacing them if they do not meet the egress requirements. Ready, go. Everybody understand that?
So unfinished basement, okay.
Okay, try again, Scott.
I was just curious about like an unfinished basement that's no bedrooms, no nothing down there.
That would qualify. That does not have a sleeping area or bedroom in it. Those windows could be evaluated and replaced. And should be, if they're inside the building envelope. Anyone else? Come on. I know somebody's got something to say.
What if it has a cot and a sleeping bag that's portable and they can move it around?
It's a
Then
sleeping area.
you drag it over to the window that meets egress.
Again, just understand we want to be considering those, but I want to keep the program in a safe place. And I will tell you, part of the reasoning behind that is too, we are obtaining more and more permits. You're having more and more people come that inspect the work. And I just happen to know how building inspectors behave because I used to be one. And it's just not something we want to get caught up in. So
move the cot and sleeping bag upstairs.
in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to make that big of a difference if we do or don't. If you're looking at the whole house, we'll still be accomplishing our goal of saving energy.
Sounds good to
Okay.
me.
Easy enough. Next one. Mr. Bolander.
Hey, Matt, can we go back to the Nest thermostats for a minute?
Sure. What's the question?
Now that we're purchasing those with crisis funds, how do you want to see that on the audit, and do we need to make a
It doesn't
separate
get audited. It's a crisis.
And do you need to make a separate what?
BWR for that measure?
That's a perfect question for this slide that Brad's covering right now.
But the answer is yes. As we continue to make this change and you're absorbing what this means, it is very, very important. Go ahead and just move to the next one there, Matt.
Okay.
I guess where we're a little bit confused out here is we've been, up till now, the first ones were purchased with light heat funds, and we've been putting those on the audit as a non-audited measure. And
Correct.
now that we're changing over to crisis funds, we just want to make sure we're doing it correctly.
And this is the exact answer. We have to document and clearly show a distinction between weatherization activities and crisis service work. As I've been trying to explain to you, the amount of money that we get for weatherization under LIHEAP is statutorily limited. And the work that we do under crisis with those funds has to be clearly independent of the weatherization. So what we had done for years, where you were documenting your crisis work that you were doing during weatherization on a weatherization report, said, I am using crisis funds to circumnavigate a federal statute, and therefore please come in and write a finding and disallow the cost and bankrupt the program. And we've got to move away from that. I will tell you, HHS, Health and Human Services Department, who manages the LIHEAP program, is getting smarter. They have people on staff that are starting to understand what's going on, and they're looking. And so we are trying to be proactive and keep the program in a good, stable place and be in compliance. And that's what we need to start doing, is we've got to start making that documentation clear, what's being done as weatherization and what's being done as crisis. And when you have a very distinct audit trail, as you point out, Kyle, where you've got an invoice that says you bought a product with crisis dollars, and then you go and install it, you put it on an audit, all those other things, that just makes it that much easier for a person to say, okay, you are now circumnavigating that statute. And we're not talking about policy, we're not talking about regulation, we're talking about a federal statute. It's federal law. So that never ends well. So that documentation, there's no big difference in what folder it goes in. It's having the paperwork show that this was done as a crisis, and it needs to be tracked back to that report, which in this case is the BWR and web grant, saying yes, it was reported to the state as a crisis activity, The documentation in the client file says it was crisis activity, and the purchasing documents show that the materials were paid for. There's a time card showing that people were paid out of those funding sources. We leave a big, big paper trail, and people will take the time to examine that, and they can piece it together. And we need to make sure that we're doing our part to make sure the documentation, that paper trail, shows that distinction.
So when we're talking about just the nests, if we're weatherizing a house and the only crisis measure is going to be a nest thermostat, what should that look like? How would an agency document it?
You would select the BWR type as HEUP, and then you would go in and you would put in the necessary information. You would put in the serial number, and then down in the comments that you put home, home was given a nest thermostat or something. That is the clear documentation. You have purchasing procurement records showing you bought that thermostat with a nest. There is a client qualification that shows the client had a heat certificate and therefore was eligible for crisis service work. And you have a report that you submitted to the state saying, I went to this home on this date and installed this crisis measure for this much money.
And
you have a clean audit trail there.
And what I've been asking auditors to do is when they would list that on the audit, they would list it as a CRM for a crisis measure. So when you're doing your itemized, basically all your itemized costs or your itemized measures at the end, you would put nest thermostat and you would put the acronym CRM in front of that, and that way you're clearly identifying that this is a measure you're doing under the crisis program, not under any other program. If you just put it in as an NAM, then it doesn't clarify that it is just crisis work. So that's why we started using that new acronym.
And then the point behind that being that because our policy and our auditing standards state that you will model the home in the state it will be after those crisis measures were installed. So if you're doing that furnace as a crisis measure, you're showing it in there so that the model doesn't try to evaluate the home under the existing furnace that's going to get replaced.
Yeah, the rule still stands for heating and cooling. Those, like, if you're going to touch the heating or the cooling during weatherization or with any crisis work, you're going to represent your post-weatherization circumstances or situation. So the heating tab and the cooling tab always have to represent post-weatherization heating and cooling. So hopefully that makes sense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. So you said so we are not using NAM anymore. So are you saying that we cannot use LIHEAP money for non-audited measures, that we can only use crisis money for those?
No, thank you for the question. We are still using the acronym, the NAM.
Okay.
We've added a fifth acronym, which is a CRM. So if you use an NAM, that would usually be your LIHEAP. It could also be your state WAP funds.
Where the SIR is not required for the measure.
Yeah, it's just, NAM stands for a non-audited measure, or exactly what Brad said, a measure that does not require an SIR to be installed. And we use that for a very long time to cover LIHEAP and crisis. But now we're just making a clear distinction that if you're doing something under the crisis program, make sure you're labeling it a CRM.
Okay, thank you.
I understand this is a major rewiring of the brain for a lot of people. Since I've been in the program, going on 11 years now, that was what everybody did, and it was business as usual kind of a thing, but it was sitting through some conferences and understanding what that impact was going to be when the time came that somebody started looking at that. And that's why we have to work to make sure that our documentation supports that we are in compliance with that statute. So,
we are at the,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, we are at the 9 o'clock mark. I think we have 3 more questions on here. Brad, do you want to end now, or do you want to try and quickly address those?
Let's jump to the one outreach one real fast, because I think that changed a lot of people. There's been a lot of discussion about waiting lists shortening up. We've got 2 or 3 agencies that have run into that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And, you know, just some ideas, and really these are things that I've actually just in talking with people, what they've been trying to do. And, you know, where do you find weatherization clients? You know, looking at, you know, in conversations with Warren several years ago, one of the things that he and I were talking about, you know, we were asking ourselves that question out loud. Where do you find low-income people? Where do our clients, you know, go? How do we interact with them or catch their attention? And you know, we came to that conclusion laundromats was a place that you might find low-income clients, and you know, hanging up flyers in places like that. In conversations I've had with Corey in the last few months, you know, he's done a really good job at reaching out to some of the local religious support networks in the Basin community to try to identify and bring clients in. Some of you have looked at trying to connect up with the food bank operations in your neighborhood, because those would be locations where you would identify individuals that were probably in a low-income status. Senior centers and places like that are also another opportunity as well. And then just trying to work better with your utility assistance office, your heat office there in your agency to get some of those clients brought over to you. And those have been some of the things that we've talked about. I don't know if Waite's on the phone, Jesse's on or not, but I know at one point he was looking at running some radio ads or something. I don't know if he ever ended up doing that and if he felt like that was effective. But this is this part where you all get to talk too. Is there other things that you've looked at doing that you felt are successful?
I know at one time social media was kind of frowned upon, but what do you think about that?
You know, the first, it would have to be within your agency's policy, whatever, you know, in your case, Scott, 5 county. You know, for us at the state, that's like, you know, lightning bolt to the heart, death penalty kind of thing. If we try to do that, we have a lot of rules that we'd have to go through to get that. We could do it. It would just have to be through a third party people that manage that stuff. But internally, you definitely could look at that. If your agency has, you know, Facebook, Twitter, all those other types of things. But I would probably consult with whoever's running those accounts for you, because who's really following you? If your social media account is really getting followed by, say, your county commissioners and mayors and those types of people, is that, I don't know. I mean, that's a decision internally I think you'd need to make, but that is how these kids today communicate. So it's not all bad an idea, for sure. Anybody else been able to come up with any effective means?
T-shirt cannons.
Your own HVAC contractors are also a good source. Right now the economy's good, so the HVAC industry isn't pointing fingers at us for stealing all their clients away from them. But your HVAC contractors all the time run into people with broken furnaces who can't afford to pay the contractor the money to do it. You know, if your HVAC contractor is friendly with you and doing your work, just tell them, hey, you know, you run into those guys, refer them to us. The RMGA.
Anyway.
Yeah. John Hill at the RMGA, I've got a pretty good relationship with him, and the RMGA has actually referred clients to the weatherization program. There was a time when HVAC contractors hated us, some very particular HVAC contractors, but like right now the economy's good, so they don't care about us. So just another avenue to think about.
You had any other ideas since we talked last time, Corey, by chance, or?
No, we haven't.
Doesn't look like Warren's on. Or Jesse, what about you?
No, just we added a bunch of flyers. I took some to some retired or senior citizen centers and things like that. But and we've got it built back up too, so I've slowed down on all that. We did try a public service announcement on the radio, but it was like 5 o'clock in the morning for one session, so that wasn't very useful at all.
You say your list came back up. What do you feel maybe drove that back up?
I think heat mainly. We had a pretty good meeting. I handed them a bunch of flyers that they were able to hand out to all their clients. And like I said, I handed a bunch out to senior citizen centers, and there's another home repair program around here that I also gave a bunch of flyers, and I think they've handed a few out also. So just kind of connecting with other programs around the area, things like that.
And I seem to recall, Carrie Lynn, back when you were doing that high energy thing, your collaboration with the heat office was what really made that engine run. I think you still work that, don't you?
Yeah, working with the heat office makes a huge difference. If they know, like, so the question we had them asking was just, how old is your furnace? And everybody always knows, like, oh, it's been there forever when we got the house 30 years ago or whatever, and they would just say, well, you might be interested in this. And they still do that for us.
Okay. And you feel like that's been fruitful of maintaining your...
It has been. It's been a good benefit. We actually were able to get a lot of applications that way from those people, and then just helping educate them on all the things that we can do so that when people would come in and say that they needed help or that this wasn't working, or even when they see those utility bills that are so high, they could tell them that they, felt like they could talk to us. And we did the flyers. We also gave them an application that they just had a stack of them printed out. And so if somebody said they were interested, they would just hand it to them, and it would have everything they needed plus our contact information. And I felt like that was a huge asset.
Alrighty.
Hey, I did have, years ago in my own little business, I ran some radio ads, and I really got a lot of traffic from them. But I identified radio stations that fit my demographic, and then I had the local, like the DJs. I didn't run like a commercial. I had the DJs plug it. So they would say certain whatever, and then we picked very strategic times of the morning to have that run. And I could see, like, I would literally get hundreds of people on my website that very day. So I think what they did what Jesse did with the public service announcement, if you're strategic about some of that stuff, that could really help.
So with my experience on that, because we did the public service announcement, and like I said, they pick whenever they do it. And we looked into buying ad time, but
Yeah.
It was thousands of dollars for
Gotcha.
a package. It was
It
crazy.
seems like I paid about $1,000, and they ran an ad for me about 10 or 15 times. And anyway, so if it's something that you need, it might, there's a little my own experience, or you might look into it a little deeper is all. So.
All righty. Well, thanks for staying late. Those of you who hung in there.
Yeah, thank you guys. Let's go ahead and end here. Thanks for all the questions. I think if you guys have questions, continue to send them to us. We may just kind of spend a few minutes at the beginning of meetings and kind of address some of these things in real time as we go forward. So, but yeah, thanks again for all the questions. Hopefully we answered some of your questions. You guys have a great day.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey.